Okay, good morning, Modern World Studies students. I'm being told that the recording from yesterday, for those people who went to class with Mr. Franco and Miss Wall, won't be available for you guys. I don't know why, but Monday's recording might not show up. So I'm making another recording for you for the 4.08 lesson. Today in history, we're going to skip past that because that was yesterday in history. So we're going to go over what is from Monday, October 30th. That's the 4.08, the War's Tide Turns. And what we'll talk about is basically this year of like 1917 where things really shift one way or the other. And you can see in April, the United States declares war on Germany. Now, the United States is not ready for war. They just don't have boats ready to go with troops just to cross the Atlantic Ocean, hit the shores, and start fighting 3 weeks later. It takes time. It's going to take almost a year really to get troops over there. It'll be early 1918 before the United States gets troops onto the field ready to fight. You got to train people. You have to draft troops. Your army is small. The United States Army was very small in 1916, and now it's got to get really big. You're going to send a lot of people over. Well, in 1917, a few months later, Russia collapses and they quit the war. So Germany sees an opportunity. Now imagine you're German. You're fighting this war. One of your allies, I'm sorry, one of your opponents gets a new ally in the United States. And you're like, oh no, the United States is going to bring all these troops over and they're going to start fighting this war. And we're barely hanging on, keeping it even. That's a problem. Germany sees a problem. But then Russia quits. Oh, one of our other opponents quit. We have a chance. So the Germans decide, okay, we know the United States troops are coming, but they're not here yet. Russia just quit. What if we pour everything we have into one last fight before the Americans get here? We can just maybe win the war. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, why did America get into the war? Well, I know you went over this yesterday with Mr. Franco and Mrs. Wall, but there were a lot of submarine atrocities. American newspapers, even though America was out of the war, it was definite by 1917. Americans mostly were on the side of the Allies. They were with the French and the English and the Russians. They were not with the Germans. Now, some Americans obviously were with the German side and they sided with them, but America's still neutral, but most of the public likes England and France as opposed to Germany. So when they start sinking ships like the Lusitania, which is sort of like the Titanic, a big liner, that was bad press for the Germans. Okay, that didn't look good. The Germans didn't look good killing 128 Americans, even though they claimed, look, this ship was carrying weapons. We're at war. So Germany had a point there. The Zimmerman note is indefensible. Sorry if my glasses are a little crooked. I think I messed them up yesterday. This Zimmerman note is a telegram between Germany and Mexico, and you can't make this up. It's too crazy to be made up. The German ambassador sends a message to the Mexican government. Now, Mexico is out of the war. Mexico has nothing to do with this war at all. And the telegram tells Mexico, hey, if you declare war, I'm sorry, if the United States declares war on Germany, Mexico should declare war on the U.S. And we, Germany, if we win the war, we can help you guys get back Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, all the land you lost, 50 years before in the Mexican-American War in the mid 1800s. Okay, Mexico is like, no, we will not be involved in this war. We have nothing to do with it. But the key to this note is the British intelligence, the British intelligence intercepts this telegram. And so, of course, the English, they give the note to the United States and say, look what we found. So, of course, why would you do that? Because, your enemy has sent a message to one of your potential allies, the United States. They're trying to get the U.S. in the war. And their enemy just sent this message that was going to clearly upset the American public, the people. And it did. It did. They they some thought it was real and not a reason enough to go to war, but for many people, it was a reason to go to war. Okay, and remember, the sinking of the Lusitania has already upset some Americans. So we now are on the point where war is going to happen. So, and again, Mexico said they have no intention of declaring war, but it didn't matter. It was still the fact that Germany sent this. So on April 6th, as it is in American politics, if you don't know this, or the American um, rules from the Constitution, the president can't declare war. He has to ask Congress to declare the war, and they do. So, and it wasn't an overwhelming vote. In World War II, you'll find that Americans in Congress overwhelmingly vote for war. World War I was not as overwhelming, but it was enough, and the war will begin. So now Germany knows America's involved, and this. Oops, sorry. Where did I go here? Would a communist takeover or the Russian Empire benefit Germany? Of the Russian Empire benefit Germany? Yes. So the Germans want this communist government to take place. I already talked about that last week, so we're going to get past that. Just know that the war between Germany and Russia ends just a few months after the United States enters the war, and it's settled by this Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. I never can say that word right, Litovsk. And it gives Germany some land that the Russians had before that, but the peace is settled and the Russian troops are no longer on the field, and the Germans have the freedom to make their attack, their final attack, which is going to be called the Spring Offensive in 1918. So some of the reasons at this point who's in a better position to win, the Triple Entente, or as I keep calling them, the Allies, they gained a new ally in the United States with many men. I mean, fresh soldiers are so important in a war. You've got soldiers coming over who don't have problems with their feet, of being in the trenches too long. They don't have lice. They have enough food. People kept calling the Americans doughboys because they had some little fat in their cheeks, because they weren't starving like a lot of the Allied troops were 3 years into the war. And America comes with so much in terms of sources, or resources, that is. Now, the Germans do have one less enemy. They don't have to worry about Russia anymore. And more importantly, guys, they are fighting on these two fronts, and now they're just fighting on this one front. So Russia is gone. Germany can pull all of their troops that were on the other side, and they can push toward the French. And so it really is an advantage for the Germans for the short time. Okay. How far am I in? I'm 8 minutes in. Okay. So Woodrow Wilson, before the war even ends, he's the American president. He issues the 14 points, and he says these are the 14 points required for peace. Woodrow Wilson starts talking in these big concepts about democracy and freedom of the seas. And again, the war is not even over yet. It's not even won yet when he's putting this out there. But he's bringing up some good points. The other European powers that are America's allies, they're now having to listen to Wilson because they need America in the war. So my glasses are really crooked. Ugh, it's the worst. Got to get these fixed. But he brings up some good points that will be adopted after the war. Wilson believes the war would come to an end after the U.S. got involved. He's kind of right about that. He thinks that each side should treat each other with dignity and grace when the war was concluded. He's about fairness, and he's about people choosing the rights of their government. Ironically, Wilson is one of the most racist presidents we've had in U.S. history, especially for a guy who's got his PhD. He's the only president to have his doctorate, so he's a smart guy. He should have known better. But Wilson's a Southern man in his heart a little bit in a lot of ways, and he was very racist and unnecessarily so. You know, many presidents in the past have racist tendencies because they're the men of their time, I guess you'd say. But Wilson was overboard, and if you think I'm exaggerating that, feel free to look it up, come back and tell me you think differently, and we can talk about it. But it's one of the unfortunate parts of Woodrow Wilson's legacy. On one hand, he's talking about fairness and freedom, and on the other hand, he's treating American citizens really terribly. The Spring Offensive, what that means is that Germany launches a big attack, one last big attack. Germany by 1918 is running out of resources. They're running out of things like, food, things you need on a daily basis. And that includes their regular citizens. They're running out of food, they're running out of weapons. They need to make one last push. But America joins. America brings in huge amounts of troops, and they're just going to keep coming. More troops. The Germans know this. It's a matter of time. If we don't win now, we will not win. They know that. The spring offensive, it is good, but it stalls. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And the Americans, even at first, they start to have some rough goes at fighting, but they eventually get very good at fighting. And so the Americans have some victories in May and in August. And these Allied victories, they mount. The Battle of Meuse-Argonne offensive, that is a big American battle from World War I. We don't have a lot of World War I battles we talk about in American history. We were only in the war for about a year, and it's not famous like World War II. So when I say the Argonne Forest, I mean, you may have heard of that, but likely you may not have. America, despite being in the war for only a year, they still sustain a lot of casualties. I think it's 117,000 or so troops are casualties in this war. That's off the top of my head, so I could be wrong. Okay, the war comes to an end on November 11th, 1918 at 11:11 a.m. Now, this was planned to end the war, and there was fighting and firing of guns and artillery right up until the war's end, which in my mind, sorry, it's my opinion, but it's stupid because a lot of people died, even though the war was already essentially over in that last day of fighting, in the last few hours. But the war finally comes to an end, thankfully. France wants their revenge. You can see that at the bullet point here. And they are going to have their revenge because we're going to talk about the peace treaty in class. I'm recording this on Tuesday morning, so we'll talk about the peace treaty either today a little bit or later in the week with Mr. Franco and Mrs. Wall. So the Germans do lose the war. I don't know why this slide's a little out of place because the war is over at an end. And I want to talk about this writing assignment really quickly because we're not going to do it. So Mr. Franco had the class yesterday with you guys, and he did mention the writing assignment, went over it, but it was hidden on my classroom, and I didn't realize that. It was my fault. So because it was hidden, you guys couldn't turn it in, even if you wanted to. So I'm either going to make this an extra point assignment when I get back from surgery a week from now, but likely we just won't do this at all. So if you started to do this, you can email me next week when I get back, and we can talk about what we'll do. I always try to give you guys points for things you do, regardless, of my mistakes. But for those people who are like, great, I don't want to do an extra writing assignment, you're in good shape. You don't have to do this. It would have been fun. A journal assignment would have been good, and it's my fault for not having it show as visible. So I apologize for that. So we're at the end of the war. 1918, it's over, and it should be all peaceful now, but it's not. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about coming up in the next lesson, because the reason why guys like Adolf Hitler get angry in the 1920s and the 1930s, and other people are angry, is because of the peace treaty of World War I. It does not provide peace. It does not provide closure. And because of that, we will have World War II. And in fact, the last thing I'll leave you with today in this recording is that there are many historians who say there is no World War I or World War II. There's one war. And that the periods between World War I and World War II were just a calm period. But the war was still the same war. And it doesn't really get finished until after World War II ends in 1945. So that's an interesting thought. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but some historians think that's the case. Something to think about before we have our next class. All right, guys, it's nice talking to you, or my recording, and I'll see you in class in a few minutes.